even notice this, but basically what happens when I do this, if I go to my my media browser here, and these are some different MP3 files, and if I choose to import one of these MP3 files into my active project, it imports quickly, but you'll notice very fast, if you look down in the lower corner, oh, it's already gone. If you were to look in the lower right corner, you'll see a little line as it's saying it's conforming the audio for you.
Right. I was going to try and point that out. It happened too quickly.
It happened too quick. Let me see if I can do. I'll try it one more time here.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna. In fact, let me select a few of these so that it'll do a few at the same time.
It's just too fast. First world software problem. There you go.
So now, if I highlight this down in the lower corner, I don't know if we can actually zoom to see that here. Oops. Nope, I'm not getting it. Okay, you'll have to trust me.
Yeah.
It's down in the lower right corner. You'll see a progress bar. Out of the corner of your eye, you'll just see this progress bar that really quickly goes through and it conforms the audio. What that is doing is it's building an uncompressed version of that music file. Right. And that way, when it's uncompressed, it's going to be frame accurate. It's going to be sample accurate or subframe accurate, because that way, when you drag and drop it to the timeline, when you hit a particular moment, you want to make sure that you hit exactly on the beat to match to a particular element on screen. It's going to be frame accurate. I'm not going to waver back and forth a bit as the MP3 file gets decoded.
Right.
So now this works great in practice, and this is it's always how Premiere has worked. But when you start talking about long term, what effect this has on your computer, well, it's building this file, and it's putting it in a place called your media cache. And we're going to talk a bit about the media cache in a couple different ways here. But basically, the media cache is a common location where Premiere puts these different types of what I like to call helper files. So this also includes when you bring in anything with audio, it draws that waveform one time and it sticks it in the cache. There's certain types of other files that it creates that just help Premiere be able to scrub really smoothly within a file. These are like Mpeg index files. And so these files, most of them are really, really small. The one type of file that lives in your cache that can get large, and this can make your primary hard drive volume grow or get filled up rather quickly, are these music files, these CFA files. So these uncompressed music files that get built whenever you import an MP3 file. They just sit there and they process in the background. They'll create these different files. If you want to avoid filling up your cache with these CFA files, it's actually not a bad thing to consider. If you edit with Premiere on a pretty regular basis, and you're moving from machine to machine on a regular basis, and in particular, and again, I'm not talking about just using an MP3 file here and there. I'm talking about for people that have libraries of thousands, tens of thousands of these music files. The good news is that the size of portable hard drives keeps getting bigger and keeps getting cheaper. I think you can get like a 2 terabyte drive now for under $100. So in the past, storing all your music in an uncompressed format was not cost effective. But in a lot of cases now, it's possible to put all of that on an uncompressed drive. Just take everything, dump it in a media encoder, and set it to render everything to WAV on a new external drive. It'll just prevent having to fill up, and that cache won't get rebuilt every time you import these files on a new machine.
Yeah, and that's something worth pointing out too. I love sort of referencing this today, because when we're talking about, especially as 4K is sort of the new standard, and of course now we're seeing just so many capture formats, whether it's 6 or even 8K for acquisition. When you think about audio files and size and how much it occupies on, let's say, a 2 terabyte hard drive, well, I know it in 44:1. Of course, we're always working in 48K in video, but something, a good idea, something to keep in mind for people is, so a stereo minute of what is effectively an uncompressed CD quality PCM wave, which would be sample rate of 44.1K, 16-bit, is 10 megabytes. So it's 10 megabytes for a stereo minute. So at 48K, that's approximately, 12 megabytes or something like that. So it's exponentially small. It's so small compared to, even video, that it's insignificant in terms of like occupying space, but it saves you an enormous amount of space and just frustration if you're not having to, again, do those conversions and have all those CFA files living there indefinitely, unnecessarily.
Yeah, exactly. And, in particular, a lot of people's editing machines, you keep the system drive, which is the default location where your media cache lives. You keep that relatively small. Windows or the Mac OS doesn't require a lot of space. So you think, oh, yeah, I can just put that into, like have 1 terabyte reserved for that, and I want 4 terabytes for my media. And if the media cache gets left in the same default location on that root drive, each of the files, like you said, 10 megs for a file, in the grand scheme of things, that's really, really a small file.
Right.
But when you start talking about 50,000 of them, okay, now you're talking about, starting to fill up a drive.
Right,
so,
exactly.
So you can avoid that step if you have a common library of your temp music and sound effects. If you convert them into like a .wav format, which is already uncompressed, Premiere is just going to reference that file. It doesn't have to decompress it and create a CFA file to get frame accuracy. So that's one little tidbit there when it comes to the cache. All the other cache files that I mentioned, things like the waveform, the actual
PEK file,
the PEK files. These other files are measured in like kilobits, or even in some cases they're measured in bytes. I mean, we're talking about teeny files. So generally you can leave the media cache where it is. The only file format that goes in the media cache that can cause your drive to tend to fill up is typically these CFA files, the WAV files.
And you raise another good point, because actually there's a similar thing on the Audition side. Funnily enough, we didn't unify the extension, but the PEK in Premiere and the PK file in Audition are effectively the same, and all they're there for is for faster redraw of the waveform display. That's what that is. So you can eliminate those. In fact, Audition even has an option not to save them. Mm-hmm. But I would argue that, again, to your point about, okay, but if you're opening up a project that has, which, if you're doing something episodic, it's not uncommon to have, several hundred little audio clips, especially if you're doing a lot of sound design. It's going to have to redraw all of those, and then you're going to see that bottom right corner progress bar in Premiere. Drawing everything. It's fast, but so that's really what it is. It's just faster to redraw, but they can easily be replaced and regenerated. And it's also a good practice. If you notice, I know this has worked for me, and I'm sure you too, Karl. I think actually we've experienced this together on stage years ago. If your UI is having issues with, like, it's not redrawing waveforms in a project that you've saved and resaved and come back to, you just get weird redraw issues on the waveforms. That's usually the fix, is if you dump those PEK files, close the session, reopen it, it'll regenerate them, and everything kind of goes back to normal.
Yeah, and that actually brings me to the one of the rules just in general about the way media cache files work. The best thing about media cache files, there's nothing in the media cache that can't be rebuilt at some point. So you can pretty much delete everything in the cache, and it's not going to affect whether or not you can open a project. Now, that said, if you clear out the cache and you've got a really, really large project, and there are a lot of cache files attached to that, when you first open up the project, you're going to see, again, down in the lower right corner, it's going to be, your system will be frumiously rebuilding and recreating all those cache files. So it might be a good idea to wait about 5-10 minutes while it gets all that done when you first open up the project, before you really dive into a hardcore editing session. So you don't want to just delete the cache, like 5 minutes before, the producers and the directors are walking into the room for a screening. That's a bad idea. But, doing it on a Friday night, the best thing I can recommend, if you're in the middle of a production and you decide, we haven't cleaned the cache in a long time, delete the cache, and then immediately after deleting the cache, reopen the projects that you're currently going to be working on over the next, week or so. And that way it'll just give the system a chance to rebuild the necessary cache files, so those projects will be ready to edit the next time you walk in the door.
Yeah.
And yeah, reasons for completely cleaning out the cache and the cache database. We actually have some settings here inside of the preferences to automatically do that for you when the cache gets above a certain size.
Can I get you to zoom in on that, Karl, just so we can see that a little bit better? Yeah.
So these are the media cache management settings here. And let me center that on the screen here a bit. There we go. Oh, well, I had it centered. My system's acting a little strange here with the dual monitor set. There we go. I think we can see that now. So, again, we have the ability to set this up to say automatically delete cache files older than 90 days. This is a good setting if you work in a fast turnaround environment, like if you're working in news or sports. You can turn that on. Typically, you're working on the latest and greatest. You've got new footage coming in, new projects coming in. Old projects get archived, and so the cache files will live on your system and build up, but everything that's older than 90 days, it's going to start to get rid of those for you automatically. This one is also good just if you want to manage this by size. If the cache ever exceeds 100 gigs on my system, this will automatically go through and clean, and you can see here it'll tell you that it's going to do this during the launch of the application. It'll clean out these different types of CFA, that's the conformed audio, PEK, that's the little audio waveform graphic, and then these IMS files, which again, they're like a helper file to just make sure that when we launch, we can launch the project faster. So that's just a little bit on the media cache. Again, don't confuse this with like scratch discs where you record audio or you capture from tape or you render your preview files. Those don't live in the media cache. These are strictly these smaller helper files that again just help Premiere run smoothly and deal with all the different types of media and the different formats that you can bring inside of Premiere. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's just a little bit about the cache. I want to switch over to talk a little bit about some of the other settings, including all of your different preferences. We do have all the different preferences. Oftentimes these have little tiny checkboxes. There's one in Premiere. You mentioned that Audition has a setting to whether to turn on and create the waveforms or not. Premiere will actually, if you turn this checkbox off here, this is called automatic audio waveform generation. And if you turn this one off, your waveforms will be blank in the timeline until you start to scrub, and then you'll see it'll build it as you play back the file. Some people like that. Some people prefer to have it do that rather than build those waveforms as you import your footage. All of these settings are stored inside of your Premiere Pro preferences, but some people don't know where those preferences are. And I find that there are some checkboxes in here that you really get used to using. There's one in Timeline called Match Frame Sets Endpoint. So when I hit a match frame, I hit the, I believe it's the F key on the Premiere keyboard shortcut. It automatically loads the current clip in the timeline in the source monitor, but it also marks that as an endpoint for me if I want to drop it in a different location. Stuff like that are preferences that you probably uncover over a long period of time. Some of these are things that I might have set 2 or 3 years ago, thought, oh, this is cool, I want to work this way from now on. If I move to a new computer, initially I'm going to be like, why isn't it doing what I'm expecting it to doing? Oh, it's not working. I don't understand. Again, it's a preference. And, if you want kind of a jump start, if you have to move to a new computer, if you're moving to a different facility, you get a new computer delivered to your home from a job that you're going to be working on. These are the types of things you need to know where these files live. Now, we do actually maintain A lot of these you can actually turn on and have these synchronize with your Creative Cloud account. So I can go to Premiere Pro sync settings, and I can choose to manage my sync settings.
Yep. And this is, again, one of those things that I think it's been in there since 2013.
Yeah.
And it wasn't always robust, I will say that. It's much better now, obviously, 7 years later. But this is one of those things that I think eludes people. And every time I show it, they're like, oh, I didn't even know that workspaces could be synced to the cloud. That, you know, and it's not everything, but yeah, also, I'm glad you're bringing this up, Karl, because this is definitely one of those, especially if you're moving. I mean, obviously now most of us, all of us being kind of sheltered in place, not moving to different locations, but perhaps moving different machines. And then I want that same environment when I'm working in Premiere on my desktop system as I am on the laptop. And it's these kind of things like the production set, like the preferences, workspaces, keyboard shortcuts that are so essential to just making me feel at home when I'm back in the app on a different system.
Absolutely. And so you'll notice right now on my system, it's saying the last time this was synced, unknown. Ooh, that's scary. I should probably do that right now while I'm thinking about it. So if I want to, I have this set up not to automatically sync my settings. I have this set so that when I want to synchronize my settings, let Autosave finish up there, I need to actually come in here and say, okay, go ahead and sync the settings now. And this will kick off, and of course it's going to have to close the current project to download and apply these settings. That's probably why I keep putting this off. I'll just go ahead and hit cancel on that. But what you'll see at that point is it'll kick off a little synchronized settings down in the lower left corner. There's a little Creative Cloud logo, and you'll start to see like 2 green arrows indicating that it's actually taking the data and moving it up into Creative Cloud for me. Now, I still have a lot of customers that, for whatever reason, these are broadcast customers or they're enterprise customers that don't have the ability to synchronize to the cloud. They've actually turned off some of the services due to security reasons. Government contractors and agencies sometimes do this. So what do I do in that situation if I can't use the cloud sync? It's really convenient. This is really convenient if you have it, but I need to be able to find this stuff and hold on to a copy of it locally. It's not uncommon to see on a shared storage volume within an editing facility, they will actually create a share or a folder that is called editor sync settings or editor settings, and they'll have individual profile folders for each of the different editors. So if I open up my Finder window here, I've actually already gone through and kind of navigated to the location of this. And let me just zoom in to the bottom of this. So if you can see that path listed at the bottom, you can see on a Mac system,
Yep.
This is connected to the users folder. This is going to be different on everybody's machine. My login is Karl Soule, so obviously that's the folder we're working on. Documents, Adobe, Premiere Pro, and then the version number of Premiere that you're working on. So I'm working on version 14. Once you find this, you're going to find a folder called Profile Dash, and again, the name of your login. If there are multiple people signing in to Creative Cloud on your machine, you might see multiple profile folders. But basically everything, all of your different preferences, keyboard shortcuts, layouts are all going to be found in this particular folder. And so it's possible to just copy this folder and paste it into a different location if you want to create a backup. So it's a similar path on a Windows machine. I was going to take a moment and show you this. This was actually, let me see if I can do this really quick here. I've got an application, I did a session on partners, and I have an HP workstation here, and I got to show something called Z-Boost. Let's see if I can find it. There it is, HP Z Central Remote Boost. Let me see if I can connect into this system here. Looks like that worked. There we go. So here I am on my Mac, but now I'm looking into a Windows machine. And if I look into the bring up a window here, an Explorer window to check out the machine. Again, it's a similar path that we're looking at here. Documents, Adobe, Premiere Pro, the version number, and then in this case, that's where the profile will be. And again, you're seeing things in here like effect presets and custom items, Premiere Pro preferences, the layouts are set up in here. Inside the Win folder is actually where I would find my keyboard shortcuts if I have any layouts there. And that is one thing that you can't translate, by the way. This is a complete aside, but
right.
Almost all of these preferences are identical from Windows to Mac if you're moving from platform to platform. The one thing that's not is
right.
the keyboard.
Right.
And we specifically do that. If you were to copy your profile folder from a Mac machine onto a Windows machine, you don't have to worry about it messing anything up because the Windows keyboard shortcuts are found in a folder called Win. If I switch back over to my Mac and you look for where my keyboard shortcuts are here, well, guess what? They're in a Mac folder.
Yeah.
We
did it right. We did it right, I gotta say.
We did do it right. We have to do this just because the default keyboard shortcuts for Windows and Mac, the way the control key is used and the fact that there's no command key on a Windows machine, engineering has tried to come up with a plan that will please everybody. The reality is it's impossible. If if you have your keyboard shortcuts, the thing that I do recommend there, just as an aside, I've gotten asked this question a fair amount of times. I'm going to go ahead and kill Remote Boost here so that we're no longer peeking into my Windows machine. But the one thing that I recommend is if you do have to kind of remap your keyboards, if you are changing platforms for some reason, there is the ability inside of here, you can actually click this button at the top marked Copy to Clipboard and paste this into a Word document where you can actually print out all of your keyboard shortcuts. And then you'll know what you need to map to where if you're moving for the first time from a Windows to a Mac platform.
Dude, that is so awesome. That's so great that it's funny. I forget that that's there at times. And I imagine for most people, even if they discover this, that button being in the top center, there's no focus on it. There's so much color everywhere else. Mm-hmm. You would totally miss that. I mean, that's just one of those really valuable hidden gems. I'm so glad you're showing this.
Awesome. Yeah, it's I totally forgot about it, and it's somebody asked me the question. Actually, I think it was Vashi asked me the question: is there a way to print out all of my keyboard shortcuts? And I was like, wow, there's no print function in Premiere. It's like, so yeah, digging around, we were able to find that. So yeah, as far as where to save those settings, the cool thing is since they are all pretty much contained in that one folder, you have an option of putting that in a safe location, like on the shared storage or on a thumb drive someplace, so that you'll know that you have your preferences. And this is going to include everything from, your screen layouts, your workspace layouts that you've created. It's going to include things like, there are track height presets that are found in here where I can expand a certain track, like the voiceover tracks, to do specific work. Just a lot of extra stuff that's found in here that you should be aware of. All right, there's one more thing that I wanted to take a moment and show here, and that deals with something in Autosave. And the Autosave in Premiere sometimes confuses people just a touch, and I wanted to kind of provide a little bit of clarity to what this is doing. Let me go ahead and zoom in on this text here so that we can see that a little better. Now, this part at the top here, the classic Autosave function, what this is doing, a lot of people like to refer to what this is doing as more of an auto archive. What I mean by that is this autosave at the top is not saving over the top of your active open project. What it's doing is it's making a copy of that project and it's putting it into a location that you specified inside of your scratch disks. So if I unzoom from here, and since a production, all of the projects in the production have one set of settings here, I'm going to go to my production settings, but project settings is right above it in the menu here. Scratch disks. So this location right here is the location where the autosave is kicking in. And so anytime you're seeing a file getting saved, the autosave is not by default saving over the active open project that I have. It is making a copy of that and it's putting it into into what I like to call like the attic. It's putting it into this other location that I can go back and work on.
And it's a discrete location too. That's the key there. Is it's not affecting the actual project file that you're working in at the moment.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what's happening here when we say it's automatically saving every 15 minutes. Maximum projects versions 20. It's going to keep 20 copies in that attic location of your project, and it's going to save those over time. Roughly every 15 minutes, it's going to kick off. There is some logic that's put in there that if you're actively working on the keyboard, if you've got a timeline playing back and so on, it's going to pause and it's going to wait until you stop working for a bit, and then it'll do the actual autosave. The challenge that I've seen with some people is, if Premiere unexpectedly quits or, you lost power on your machine or something like that, you go to open up the original project that you were working on, and suddenly it's like hours and hours earlier. Right. So the thing to always remember is, first off, breathe. Right. Don't panic.
That's right. Don't throw anything at the laptop or computer screen just yet.
Exactly.
Take a moment.
Remember where that attic is and go and find that autosave. And typically the last autosave in there is going to be, if you've forgotten to hit, Command S or Control S on your keyboard to save the main project, it's not an issue. Now, we just added in this last year this additional checkbox here, but I don't think a lot of people know about it yet. First off, there's a checkbox here as well. This save backup project to Creative Cloud. It'll still save to that attic location. It'll still save to that scratch disk location locally on your machine or on your network storage. But you also have the option of having it save a backup where it'll upload a copy of your project file into your Creative Cloud Files folder, which is nice because that's, completely machine independent. If, I suddenly have to move to Ecuador, I can access my Creative Cloud and the projects are there. Now, this last checkbox, though, is giving people what a lot of people are kind of assuming Autosave has done in the past. By turning on this checkbox here, you'll see that this says it also saves the current project. So this means every time you see that Autosave window pop up, it's not just making a copy and putting it in the attic. It's actually saving over the top of the project that you're actively working on.
It's doing a Command Control S for you, which you might not want, and that's one of those dangerous, because I know I usually, and I was going to ask you about your preference and sort of Hollywood's preference for autosave time. I keep mine at around 7 minutes, which seems kind of fast, but I keep that other checkbox unchecked because I'm always versioning up the project files, so with every couple of tweaks that I do, it'll go from, V1 to V1A, and I usually get A through C, and then if it's a significant change, then it's version 2. So I wouldn't want it to consistently automatically save over top of itself, because then I've killed all the progress that I'm kind of tracking myself with, by renaming them.
Yeah, precisely. That's one of the reasons why it is a preference. Enough people want it to just, when they see that save bar come across the screen, they want the confidence to know that they open up that exact project again, it's going to be at that exact same location. and that's why the checkbox is in there. But for a lot of editors, they wanted the autosave, the way it was designed was to give you sort of that backup copy that you can go back to if you need. But you choose when you hit the Command S or Command Shift S to save your project, so that way you can kind of determine, it's like, okay, I want to make sure I'm keeping whatever I've got up until this point. So yeah, it's just an option. It's something that different people are going to treat it different ways, but I think a lot of people would like to turn this on so that whenever they see that autosave going across the screen, they know that their master, the mother project, if you will, is actually getting updated.
So about your, like, some of the, do you see any particular kind of trends or things with all the Hollywood crews that you work with in terms of, like, what is a standard autosave? Because 15 minutes, you could do a lot in 15 minutes. That to me almost seems a little too long.
And I'm trying to remember what these numbers are set by default, because
I forget myself because I've customized all of them for so long.
I think the default used to be, because we used to joke about flipping the numbers around. I think the default is something like autosave every 20 minutes, only keep 5 versions. And
right.
The very first, because I've had this discussion with a number of editors, and they say, yeah, the first thing I do is I flip those numbers. So
right.
Autosave every 5 minutes, and maximum version numbers, I want 20 copies. So that's not uncommon. Really, with the logic that we have in place to try and keep autosave from kind of getting in your way, it is one of those things that as you're working with productions in particular, where now you have much smaller projects, the autosaves take much less time. I think the biggest call here is how big are you letting your Premiere Pro projects get? And if you're dealing with projects that, the single Premiere Pro project itself is like 300 megs or 400 megs, that's a whopping big Premiere project. I've seen them on some documentary films before we had productions. People would do stuff like that. The autosave can get a little bit annoying because it can take 20, 30 seconds to save a file that size. Yeah, if you can set it up for I think that's probably the biggest deciding factor. 5 to 7 minutes is typically what we see. And I would put around 7 minutes is probably right in the sweet spot for where you want this to be auto-saving.
Yep. That's kind of my always go-to. Same for Audition as well. 7 minutes.
While we have time, just really quickly, I'm sure you probably already talked about this or covered this, but this was sort of like one of the big, I want to say, hits of this 14.2 release that dropped this week. We now actually have, for the default output.
Oh yes, zoom in on that, dude, because this has plagued so many users over the years. Yeah,
this is a setting that it was in Premiere for many years. It went away because of some changes in the operating system, and now Adobe Engineering has brought it back. So this idea of having a setting, basically there was a version of the Mac OS that started to split out all the different devices. It used to be you had what was called the system default, and it meant if you had headphones plugged in, your audio went to the headphones. If you pulled your headphones, it would switch automatically in the background to your MacBook speakers, so that you could just move seamlessly back and forth between these different items. They made a change to allow for addressing all different types of audio. It was a necessary thing that Apple did, so that they could allow for more like USB devices and other types of headphones and different devices. But unfortunately, it made it very difficult to come up with just sort of a one-stop setting that would just take the operating system audio, and automatically switch for you. So now, if I'm listening to my laptop speakers and I suddenly want to go to headphones, plug in headphones. If this is set to built-in output, this will give me, it'll just automatically go and switch to my headphones for me. I don't have to fumble around in the operating system or come into Premiere and change this value. So it's just a nice little time saver, and it's been very well received. I think a lot of us, it's really funny how, with engineering, sometimes the really small features that we add in a dot update get the most love on social media, and this is one of those. So
awesome, man. So is that pretty much the content? I think that's kind of what we wanted to cover today. Did you have anything else that you wanted to?
No, I think that's pretty much it. These are, like I said at the beginning of this, these are not the super sexy features, but they're really, really necessary, particularly for people that, either move around from system to system or, I always like to kind of know where these things are at. For me, it's kind of like, it's something I'm not going to deal with very often. It's like having the jack in the back of the car with the spare tire. It's just, I'm glad it's there. I want to check it every so often to make sure it's still there, that the tire's got air. But in my day-to-day driving, I don't typically think about it or worry about it. But this is one of those sessions. It's just good to know about this type of stuff, kind of the maintenance under the hood. One last thing that I'll mention for just going back to the media cache for a second before we wrap up. If you're looking to get better or faster performance, you can change these media cache locations.
Yeah. And drive type actually has a huge influence on this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in a lot of cases, even if you're working on something like a Mac Pro cylinder, where you don't have additional places for like internal fast storage, hooking up an external SSD and moving these two locations to that SSD can actually help to boost performance. The ideal solution for your media cache is to have your cache on local, very fast storage. So, and typically, a 1 terabyte drive is going to be way more than enough for storing all these cache files, even if you're not, your music files, you're not taking the time to decompress them ahead of time. So, getting something like a 500 gig SSD, hooking it up to your system and setting this, great advice. You'll definitely see an improvement, particularly on opening up larger projects.
Yep. Oh yeah, and I've even seen people. I mean, I've done it myself. Now, of course, on the newer like MacBook Pros that we have, they don't have the card slots anymore. But even using like ultra fast SD cards and things, particularly like with After Effects. I know a lot of people who often do that. If you don't have that half terabyte or terabyte SSD, that's another great solution because that media is going to be super fast, quick asynchronous access, and it'll make a significant difference whether if you were trying to do it all on like the system spinning drive, a 7200 RPM spinning drive. It's so much better to have it external, in some flavor.
Yeah, and typically when I've talked to, and again, this is an area where documentary filmmaking, just because of the volume of media that's typically shot for stuff like that, where this really comes into play is, people who are still working on older projects, they haven't broken things up into productions yet. We have seen a couple of cases where, a single big documentary project, all self-contained within a single Premiere project, can take a long time to load. It can seem like it, can take, tens of minutes. Usually the case there is there's just so much media in the drive. For each piece of media, Premiere checks to make sure everything is ready to edit in the project when you open it. So not only is it checking the media clips, but for each media clip that's in there, it has maybe 2 or 3 of these cache files. It's the cache file checking that's actually kind of slowing things down. So moving the cache over to like a fast SSD on a USB 3 or a Thunderbolt connection, can definitely speed up the load time on a single project. But I'd also, in this day and age now with productions was such a huge game changer. I would take the time to break that big project up into a production so that you can start to move your footage into different categories of, which story arc are you working on today? You just open up those projects instead of having to open up absolutely everything, to get started with the type of work you're going to do for that day's editing session. So just another little best practice to think about. Awesome. Frank. Thanks, Frank.